Hi, I'm Jandro Gamboa. Primarily, I'm a high school teacher. I also write comics, and I think that's what brought us here today. My comic is only about a few years old. I got about 5 issues. I wanted to write comics to show people that I'd never saw in comics before, and I think a lot of creators that are involved in this organization, this program, kind of feel the same way. Um, so yeah, like I never saw anybody that looked like me in a comic unless he was mugging somebody in an alley or some kind, or was like kind of the punchline or like just like oh that silly guy with his funny words. So I wanted to make comics that showed like people that look like me, acted like me, because there's something unique to being a minority nerd. we're not really like the comic book guy in The Simpsons. Where like we work on cars. We're good at stuff too. So yeah, I just wanted to make something also that my goddaughter could read because when she was starting to read and I would take her to the comic store, she would point at something because hey, you like that guy, don't you? I'm like, hell yeah, Green Lantern. Pull it off the shelf, turn the page, a guy's getting his hand cut off. I'm not going to show that to a 7-year-old. So I wanted something that was all ages that shows people that you don't normally see in a positive light. And as I write it, I'm just finding natural ways to expand that to not just people that look like me, but like other people. Like I'm reading a lot of books lately about what aces, like asexuality and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, that how would that affect the way somebody, like, I never thought about it because I'm a very virile man, so like I never thought about what the opposite of that would be. And so like I'm experimenting with some story ideas where it's not the point of the story, but it does factor in. Um, like yeah, so I'm just kind of learning as I go along, and the more I read, the more I learn. Being a literature teacher and my dad being a literature and history professor, a lot of my influences aren't just comics. Um, I remember my dad once said, if you want to do something artistic, you can't just look at that art. Like sculptors shouldn't just look at sculptures. Writers shouldn't just read. You get out there, get your hands dirty, do something. So a lot of what I write, actually, the inspirations come from epic poetry. Don Quixote is like one of my favorite stories. It's tattooed right there. And also Aztec mythology was like, that's that tattoo. Uh, those influence a lot of what I write. Like right now, I'm reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's I think technically the oldest written story, that we can find, that as far as humans go, at least. I know there's ancient alien theorists. I'll leave them to it. But and I'm reading it, and I'm like, this is a very tolerant book. I don't know how else to word it. Like they're talking about men loving men, and it's not a big deal. It's not. They're not being punished for it. They're not turning into salt or whatever. They're just like it was just a matter of course. And that could just mean like bro, or like we fought together, we died together, like Fast and the Furious kind of silliness. But I don't see it that way. I'm reading this thinking this is 3,000 years old, and they're like 3,000 years ahead of how half this country thinks. And I see the story I'm writing right now, which we'll probably go into more later, as more of an epic poem than a comic. I see it as like the typical hero's journey. I use a lot of what I learned and a lot of what I teach to write the story. I don't really advertise to my students that I write these comics. Now and then a kid will see me like at a local show because I have an unusual last name. There's a comic book store in town, and they say, Are you related to a guy that writes a comic?" And I was like, "Oh, that's me," because I don't lie to the kids either. But I also don't want to make a big deal out of it. And I got like, and they read it and they say, like, you know, I've never seen a Mexican superhero. I'm like, there's a reason because there aren't a lot. Hopefully that's changing, but like, yeah. So yeah, and what was I talking about? Yeah, so as far as the epic poetry goes, that's kind of like probably my biggest influence for anything I've ever written. I used to write short stories. I paid for college writing short stories, and those were fun little things. But I wanted to write something bigger, something in larger scope, and nothing like an epic poem to show like a guy from like, because with an epic poem you see the rise and the fall, and I think that's one of the things we don't see a lot. Is the back end of glory, is I think heard a professor call it once because it sounded gross. So I remembered that. Actually, I would probably recommend a book that came out about 2 years ago called Tales from La Vida. I have a 2-page story in it. Daryl Watson, I think. Oh God, yeah, Daryl Watson. He drew the art. That's a good introduction to me because that's a story of me as a teacher. Like it was something that it's idealized. I'm a little skinnier, a little younger, a little less gray, but it's me. And I remember the kids asking me after the Oscars once. They said something like, "Don't you wish there were more Oscar winners or actors that were Mexican?" I'm like, "No, I want more Mexicans in college and as doctors. I want them to, policymakers. I don't. You can have Hollywood. It's. I mean, I'll watch your movies. I don't care, but I don't. That's not as important to me as community leaders and people that call the shots. I want more brown people there. I want more anything there. I don't want to just look up and see people that look like the guys on the money. That's my inside joke with the guys on the money. Those guys, the ones that ruin everything. Beyond that, grab this. This is the first issue. There we goes of my comic, The Luchador. I started this comic with Bernice Talley, who's a very talented artist on her own, and now I'm working with Nathan Campos. Bernice is going to grad school, so so she can't yeah, like I mean, I went to grad school too. Like you can't do grad school on the side, or you can't do other things on the side for that matter too. So that's a good way to get started on me. I got a couple of other projects. That was my all ages stuff. I have some ideas for some more adult sounds gross, just more like PG-13R kinds of stuff. One's a story that's been in my head forever. Um, it's a prohibition story about what if music was outlawed. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to write a story that you're not going to hear that has so much to do with music, and that's been the hardest part of getting that like script going. I have another idea for a book. Oh shoot, what was that one? Oh, I won't say what it's called because it's a buzzword right now, but it's like a County Monte Cristo kind of story where a government sponsored superhero is executed and he comes back to life 30 years later or 20 years later, and he's like, I don't recognize America, so I'm gonna have to make it what I want it to. I have to make it the America I remember. And but that means tearing down a few statues. That means changing a few cities' names. That means pissing off a lot of the people on the money, as I like to say. So that one ebbs and flows. That's probably the oldest story in my head. My mom and my best friend both thought that would be the first comic I published. The problem is, depending on who the president is, my passion for that project, because like I sit down, I write, okay, all right, what are the evil people going to do? And I write it down, and then I watch the news. I'm like, he did something worse than I could. That was worse than I could even make up. Like, and oh God, oh, and so like, it's the truth is stranger than fiction. So that project is going to take a while to get off the ground, but the main run right now is I have 12 issues planned for The Luchador. We're up to number 5 now. It's going to be 3 arcs. The first one's done at 5. The next arc I think is going to be 3. And then we're going to close with a 4-issue arc. Okay, I'm a big. I just turned 43. I'm a little old. I like paper comics. I like standing across from a table and handing somebody a comic. And that's the biggest part that's been missing these last 5 months. I mean, I guess I could put on like a 3-page preview of my book, but there's like, if someone's clicking along, they can't ask their specific questions. Like the first comic book I ever sold was in Long Beach. I think it was a Latino Comics Expo. It was at the Museum of Latin American Art, and this man was there with his daughter, and he was able to look me in the eyes and say, is this, what can I hand this to, can my daughter read this? And I said, yeah, absolutely, you could read it with her. I get a good spiel. I'm like, read it to her, change your voices, stuff like that. I don't think that sale would happen online, or at least, I mean, I'm sure it does. I have an online store, and every time I put out an issue, I get a few orders, but for small press, the way to go is usually face-to-face right across. Now that I have a storyline completed, most online retailers, or whatever you would call them, like Amazon, Comixology, they want a full arc. From last time I looked, at least, they want a full arc before they commit to putting your book online, because they don't want to publish part one of 5 and that's all they ever get. So now that I have a complete arc, I'm going to start looking into that. My artist is a lot younger than me. He just graduated, so he, like all 20-year-olds, he knows everything. So he's like, let's just, I didn't mean to make fun, but he's like, he's real gung-ho about getting this like virtually. And I'm like, all right, but it's just not as fun for me. As far as creating this way, again, I think about the Lord of the Rings. The first round of movies that came out, the ones actually called Lord of the Rings, were vibrant, they were beautiful, there was passion. And then I remember this picture from like years later when they were filming The Hobbit as a trilogy. Yeah, like I could read that in the bathroom, but they somehow made 3 movies out of it. There's a picture of Ian McKellen just sitting in the middle of a set with his head down because like that's not what he signed up for. He didn't sign up to talk to a bunch of tennis balls on sticks and like blue screens. The original Lord of the Rings, it had a lot of special effects, but there's also just beautiful sets and he's surrounded by actual people. And that's kind of how I feel, not just in the day job, but like I don't get to talk to my artist face to face anymore. And because that's how I get a lot of stuff along, especially Bernice has been a friend for like 15 years. So we had a shorthand, but not really through email. And then with Nathan, he's a guy that kind of grew up with technology being the norm. He's better at it, and I'm just trying to catch up. So I'm definitely learning how to do it. I did meet with Nathan and actually Bernice last week so they could sign physical copies of the books. And I'm like literally driving. Anytime I drive somewhere, I'll look for the stores in that town and I'll say, hey, you guys want to support a book you never heard of? And most people are cool about it. Like I got that Bible salesman mentality of like door to door, like, hey, and most, especially small comic shops, they're down. They're like, yeah, absolutely. Like around here, it's not a problem at all because a lot of the stuff in this book is kind of like local, not inside jokes, but things that like are unique to where I live. Like growing up, we had Mexican gangster surfer punks, which is like, that's what I grew up around. Like, that's kind of how I see myself too, except for the surfer part. I didn't learn how to swim until like 3 years ago. So I kind of like, I prefer in person. I prefer all that. I like that. And you probably know this too. Like, I like anybody that's been to a con knows what it's like where you realize, oh, I've been walking for 15 minutes. Where the hell am I? Like, your hands are full of merchandise. Like, I don't remember buying this, that kind of thing. I love, you get back to your hotel, you're emptying your bag saying, hey, where did this come from? I miss that part of it. And you can't really do that virtually. If they can figure out an app for that, where you buy something that you don't know, you don't remember, that'd be great. But I guess that's just Amazon when you're drunk. I guess that would be it. But yeah, I do miss the way it used to be, and we'll get there again. I just don't know how soon. And I've been quarantined before for like, they thought I had like SARS or whatever one time. So like it was over in 36 hours. This is like unusual. This is it's going to change the world, and it happens every 100 years. So good news is it's not going to happen again in our lifetimes. But I think it's still important to create art, and especially with comic books. That's very unique because as hard as it is for somebody like me, most people can do it virtually. And I mean, we published. I think we started issue 5 after the quarantine started, and it's done sooner. Like, I mean, he works all digital. The longest gap was sending it to the printer and getting the physical copies back, and that's just gas. That's just trucks. That's just time. And it's important to keep creating. It's important to represent what's happening now, because everything that we put out is a document. Like right now, my struggle with the book I'm writing is, do I have people wearing masks in the background? Like, do I want to, or do I want my book to be timeless? I think I was going somewhere with that. And so yeah, so going back to it, I think absolutely, especially with the kinds of creators that go to SoulCon, we do have a responsibility to address what's happening. Not so much, and like on the other side, like, I mean, we have the pandemic, we have plague, but we also have unrest. And anybody that says comics, I you've probably seen it too. You have people say, don't make comics political. I'm like, Did you read Captain America? I mean, that was political. Like, he punched Nazis. It doesn't get more political than that. Did you read Black Panther? He beat up the Klan. Like, I'm sure there's very fine people on that side too, but comics have always been political. Neil Adams with the Green Arrow and Green Lantern, he, drug use. I mean, even in the like Watchmen's political, and people love that stuff. I mean, I have my feelings on it. I think it's a little. I think that's well. Anyways, I think we should absolutely tackle it. The balance I try to find is not letting the anger overtake me when I'm writing. Like working on the next arc, I almost wrote a scene where my character, like, I didn't get as far as what position, but he was basically gonna mutilate a public official and I'm like, oh, I can't. No, that's not what I'm like. My whole point for this book, The Luchador, is to have something anybody can read. It's just really hard not to feel angry sometimes. Um, I had this like the original draft of The Luchador did involve what Fox News would call a race riot, but what more people would just call standing up. And I thought, no, Clinton's president. Now this is how far back this story goes. Clinton's president. It's fine. It's fine. And then the next 8 years happened, and I was like, okay, it's time to dust this story off. And by the time I was ready for it, oh, Obama. Oh, things are going to be great for another 8 years. And then now, you don't say evil's name because it gives it more power, but like it's hard not to be angry. And the best thing you can do is, if you don't address it, just it doesn't hurt you. Just put beautiful things into the world. It doesn't. I mean, we need distractions too. Like for me, it used to be movies, but there's no new movies, and I think I've seen every movie twice since everything started. Like I'm dipping into Bollywood on my Netflix at some point. Like I'm like, well, I used to watch these in college. There's probably they make one of these movies like every day, so like there's gonna be their output is amazing. And I in college especially, I was like, hey, finally somebody that looks like me in a movie. So it was nice. It's a fun little retreat too. You don't have to. You have a responsibility, I think, to address things, but it doesn't always have to be about that, because people need distractions too. Like I know from where I work, I don't want to talk about work once I'm home, and it, and I have to balance that, because the people that are doing evil, that's all they think about all day. And wow, I'm contradicting myself as I go along, but damn, that was almost philosophical. I just think we should keep creating, just to burn off that energy, because all the tragedy aside, I don't think I've ever had this much time to focus on like side projects. Like I taught last year. Like I taught the end of the year from March to June virtually. Unfortunately, a lot of kids, I have a lot of seniors, they checked out. And it's not just them. A lot of parents said, "You're not at school, fine. You're coming to work with me," because they don't see this as valid. They don't see, oh, you're just staring at a screen. You can do that anytime. No, you can't. You take them to the fields for 8 hours. They're not going to be in the mood when they're done. Plus, that's what kids do for fun. So they're staring at a screen for school, rub their eyes, and say, okay, let's go onto my Steam account. See, I know what that is because I'm not that old. I think the distraction should be there. But I also, man, it's a hard balance. I think that's kind of why I've been wrestling with the idea of resurrecting some of these old comics, because I like my fun book. I want to keep it fun. I want to keep it timeless. I want to keep it where a kid could read it without having uncomfortable conversations. But I'm feeling more and more I got to create something that is speaking to the time. So stay tuned next year.